The title of our Torah portion of the Shabbat is Behar. Behar means on the mountain. Behar covers chapter 25 and the first two verses of chapter 26 of the book of Leviticus. It is therefore extremely brief, but as its title implies, Behar, on the mountain, it is very important. Great things happen to the Jewish people upon mountains. Surely that's the case here in Leviticus as God continues the revelation at Mount Sinai. The portion begins with encouragement to keep Shabbat and expands the concept of Shabbat to include the sabbatical and jubilee years. But at the end of the Torah portion, as the maftir, the final verses, begin, we see exactly how wonderfully important a dictum at a mountain can be for the Jewish people. By way of introducing this dictum, I'll rely on another dictum from philosophy. The famous dictum by the French philosopher René Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Descartes wrote this dictum, no doubt sometime during the 30 Years' War, the sectarian struggle between the Catholic Church and the emerging Protestant Church. Again, the 30 Years' War that decimated Europe. It was a time, no doubt, that Descartes, among many others, needed to turn inwards to find meaning to life. And there he found, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Surely beyond thinking, world experience then would have underscored the idea that life was absurd, if not indeed horrific. Of course, this speaks to the meaning of life. And I would propose that here at the end of the Torah portion, Behar, upon the mountain, we find what Judaism believes is the meaning of life in its essence. To begin, when does life begin? According to rabbinic understanding, the book of Exodus teaches that life begins at the moment of birth. In Exodus we see that an unborn child has no status as a nefesh chaya, as a living soul. The Mishnah then later clarified exactly when life begins, proposing that life begins when most of the child emerges from the birth canal, most of the child being understood as the head. So, according to Judaism, life begins at the moment of birth, specifically when the head emerges from the birth canal. But having said that, nonetheless, Judaism recognizes that the beginnings of life are very tentative, and therefore a child is not considered fully ensouled until the 30th day of life. Jewish tradition teaches that if a child dies before the 30th day of life, one is not to eulogize it. One is not to observe its yahrzeit from year to year, because it had not yet been considered fully ensouled. But it's interesting then to offer a minority opinion by one of the ancient sages. He proposed that life begins when a child can utter Amen. How old is such a child? 18 months? 24 months? What this minority opinion proposes is that life begins when we can affirm that we stand in covenantal relationship with our Creator. That leads to the next question. When, according to Judaism, does life end? The Talmud, Tractate Shabbat, speaks to this question. It describes how a predicament might arise if an earthquake were to occur on Shabbat, and consider that Israel, in fact, runs above a geological rift. Earthquakes are commonplace in the Middle East. What happens if an earthquake occurs on Shabbat and there are victims that are covered over by rubble? One of the 39 forms of forbidden activity on Shabbat is lifting. But for the sake of pikuach nefesh, saving a soul, one indeed can break these prohibitions of forbidden work on Shabbat. So what the Talmud then instructs is that the rescuers clear away rubble, looking for the person's noses. They place a feather under the noses, and if the quills of the feathers move, then they know that the person is still breathing and therefore still alive. But the Talmud then continues, if in removing the rubble it's discovered that the neck bones are crushed, then it's assumed that even if the person is still breathing, the person no longer has the ability to keep the commandments. And thus, you wait until after Shabbat to clear away the rubble from such victims. I don't know that this is intended to describe exactly how we should treat such circumstances, but it is intended to teach us something about the nature of life. Life ends when we no longer have the ability to keep the commandments. Life ends when we no longer have the ability to act in accordance with our covenantal relationship with God. And here, now, at the end of our Torah portion, Behar, from the mountain, we see this quintessential statement of the nature of Jewish life. Verse 55 of chapter 25 of Leviticus, Ki li v'nei Yisrael, because the people of Israel are mine, says God. Avadim, they are my servants. Avdehem, they are servants. Asher hotzeti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. Ani Adonai Elohechem, I am the Lord your God. To exist, according to Judaism, is not to think. To exist, according to Judaism, is to do. Specifically, to keep the mitzvot, to fulfill our servant relationship as God's servants here on earth. May all of us live up to these glorious words. Come study Torah with us at Temple Emmanuel. Shabbat Shalom.